Okay, so today we're going to be installing a strain gauge on a thin metal piece like this. We'll be loading it through the hole and installing the strain gauge 105 millimeters from the hole up to the edge here. Installation techniques can vary. Today we're going to be looking at one where we're using a strain gauge with pre-attached lead wires. They come in these little plastic folders like this, and we can easily hold the strain gauge and place it with our hands. If we're using a small gauge without pre-attached lead wires, such as this tiny one here in the plastic, it's a bit harder to hold the lead wires and maneuver it around. So in that case, there's some techniques we're going to show you with some tape on how to stick the strain gauges on when they haven't got lead wires, or if you just prefer tape as well. With the strain gauge that's longer, such as this one for concrete, we may use tape just for the fact that it's too long to handle and it's a bit too floppy. So we can use tape to help us align this. So we'll go through those techniques for the strain gauges in a minute. First, we've got to start marking this out and preparing the sample. The first thing we need to do is roughly know where we're going to put the strain gauge. In the real world, if this was a bridge, we wouldn't want to be cleaning and preparing a large area. We just want to keep that preparation and the cleanliness of the area in a small place to save time and to save effort. So in this case, I'm going to first mark out my area. So it's 105 millimeters from the hole. Now you might want to ask what we use to mark. We could use a pencil to mark, they're quite common. We could use a scribe, which is a sharp metal point that we can scratch the material with. That'll work fine on aluminium, but on things like carbon fibre, it might break the fibres. So you could use a pen or some other description of marking just to make sure we get the gauge where we want to get the gauge. In this case, I'm just going to use a pencil today. So 105 millimeters from the hole is here, and then I've got an area around there that I want to prepare. The first thing I want to do preparing this area is to degrease it. So we've got a little pump bottle here that dispenses degreaser when we press it. I'd highly recommend some lint-free tissue. I rip it into a few different smaller pieces because I don't need a lot. I can pump it on the degreaser, it gets it wet, and I can wipe it, and then I can have a look at it after I've wiped it, and I can see if it's dirty or not. In this case it's dirty, so I throw that away. I get the next piece out. I repeat this procedure until I wipe it and it's clean when I remove it. It's a good idea to wipe from the centre out from the strain gauge installation, and that way I'm not wiping dirt in, I'm always wiping the dirt out from my installation. So I've still got a little bit there. I'll just get some more tissues. In, out, give it a good wipe. Looks like I need one more. Some grease hiding on my sample, I think. And that's come away and that's clean now. So although I have to do some more things to this, at least when I'm abrading the surface, the next step is abrading. So I've got some abrasive paper. At least I'm not rubbing grease in. I've got rid of the grease and I've got rid of the bulk grime, I suppose. And now I can wipe this down and I can prepare it. I'll have to do another clean though. So I've wiped my pencil mark off. So all right, I'm going to mark this again, and I'll use a scribe this time. So 105 millimeters is on that mark. And now I want to put, get my abrasive paper, sand where I want to put the gauge, and I want to make my first pass on the abrasive paper at 45 degrees, and then I want to make my second pass at the other 45 degree angle from this. So now I've abraded the surface. I don't need a lot of abrasive paper in this case. You can see my sample is uniformly abraded, but now I've got the aluminium dust on here. So now I'm going to go back to my initial clean, initial method. I'm going to give it one wipe out, and I'm also going to give the table a little wipe there so I get rid of some of the the dust that's fallen off, to keep my work area clean. Sometimes in the field it's not possible to have it as clean as this, so if you've got dust blowing around and wind, do your best. So from the centre out and wipe, it's coming away dirty. So I've got to repeat that process again until it comes back and the strain gauge is, and the paper is clean. And I'm wiping from the left to the right and the right to the left. So one more should do it. So that's coming away clean. And now I can mark my sample accurately to put my strain gauge on. It might be worthy to note that I've used this on a dirty surface, so I'll just give my tools a little bit of a wipe, just to make sure there's no big stuff getting on there. All right, 105 millimeters. Okay, so that's marked off in a straight line of where I want to put the gauge. I'll just measure twice, stick once. Okay, so I've marked my sample now where I want to put it. I've got a cross mark and I've got a longitudinal mark. And the idea on this installation here is I want to put this strain gauge on this orientation. So after the gauge is on, I can fold the lead wires back over the gauge, and I'll show you this technique to waterproof it, and the lead wires will be coming out from my left, or from the camera's right hand side. I could also install it so the lead wires are coming out to the right, but in this case with my sample, I want to clamp this sample on a table, and I want to load the sample on a table, so I don't want to squash the lead wires. But when I install it, it's a little counterintuitive. I need the lead wires coming out this side. The lead wires allow us to hold the gauge and position it, ready to place it on. We're using cyanoacrylate, so it's instant adhesive effectively. And you can see the little strain gauge here with the lead wires attached. We'll show you a couple more techniques today where we're sticking gauges on without pre-attached lead wires. So these are a little harder to hold with your hand, and there's a technique we can use with the high release tape that works well for that. When you're sticking long gauges on, like for concrete, you also may want to use the tape just to allow you to control that gauge a little bit better. It's a little bit harder to put thumb pressure on a long gauge like this. You really need to put almost palm pressure on this, so you need to be able to somehow hold this a little bit better than just with your thumb. So we've got everything prepared, we've got the surface cleaned, I've got my CN adhesive out. It's important to get the right adhesive, it's part of the measurement chain. So I've got the CN adhesive out, and what comes with the strain gauges from TML are these little pads that stop your fingers sticking to the gauge when you put them on. So we're going to get one of these little polyethylene pads out, or sheets, and that stops our finger sticking to the strain gauge. So we need to get that ready before we put the adhesive on, otherwise we're going to be stuck holding the gauge with adhesive on it. So now I'll crack open this sheet. We gently crack open the gauge binder. Got the gauge in my hand. Might be a little rookie mistake more than anything else, but we want to know which is the top of the gauge and which is the bottom of the gauge. We don't want to stick the gauge on upside down. Might sound a little bit funny, but they're small and they're hard to find out. So that for me is the bottom of the gauge. I'll get the adhesive out, and I can slowly squeeze a bit of this adhesive out, and I can use the tip to move it around a little bit. So we want to get the adhesive on, we want to get the gauge down, and we want to press down on it pretty fast. We don't want to hang around. So I'm going to squeeze a bit of adhesive out and just move it around the back of the gauge just to get it evenly coated. I'm going to put the gauge down in the alignment that I want, and then I've put my finger down and I hold it there for about 30 seconds to 2 minutes to allow the gauge to stick. Okay, so now I've held the gauge down for a couple of minutes. I can take my sheet away and I can have a look at my gauge installation. So I've got the gauge on, the lead wires are still hanging off it, and it's fairly well positioned. I'm pretty happy with that one. You can see around the gauge here that I've got quite a large glue line. I think I put a little bit too much adhesive on this, so I really need to protect that if I waterproof it. So for this instance it's okay, but I'd like to keep that a little smaller in the future. So now it comes to waterproofing. The next thing we do after we do this, we can inspect the gauge to make sure it's okay. We should do a continuity check and an insulation resistance check here. We don't want the gauge and the lead wires being in contact with the aluminium, because that will give us incorrect readings. So after we've done our checks, we could take this SB tape off, which is like a blue tack on the tape. I've cut a little piece of that off with some scissors, so I've got a bit of that on, and I can place that onto the gauge like so. It doesn't stick to the backing tape, so the backing tape can be used to press this first layer of SB tape down to really give us that waterproof area. At the same time as I'm doing this, I can fold this lead wire back over itself. I could put a slight bend in the lead wires, and in this case it's quite good to have a toothpick handy, where I can get a toothpick across and I can put the stress relief in the lead wires, so the gauge isn't going to pull the lead wires open when it stretches. So that's the installation there with the lead wires and the tape around the other way. And the lead wire is coming out the direction that I want it, so that's not going to get a problem when I clamp it down. So that's the first layer with the SB tape. Once again, I can push it down by using the backing tape the SB tape comes with. And that's a nice little layer of waterproofing now, ready to go. It's very, very sticky, this SB tape. So I'm going to put a second layer on of a tape that we call VM tape. It's a vinyl tape. So you'll notice that this is black in colour, and it's got a sticky side and a non-sticky side. So I'll cut a bit of that off with a pair of scissors. And that looks quite a long piece. You can cut it down in length as well. We don't want to put too much on. We want to try and keep this fairly small. So you can see this is going to be the area of the VM tape I'm putting on. I could peel the backing off, and now I can place the VM tape over my SB tape, and once again I can push that down. So the VM tape should cover all the SB tape, so I've really got two layers of waterproofing. I can push that in, can stick a little bit to the gloves, so once again you can use the backing from the SB tape to just allow you to give you that pushing down without the sticking that you need. So now you can see we've got an installation that's complete. We've got the gauge underneath, a layer of SB tape and a layer of VM tape. Now we're ready to go and test our sample off. If we were using this with different size gauges, different types, or if we wanted to use a different technique, I'm going to show you a couple of techniques now that would complement the one or be a different option for you. So I'm not going to prepare the surface on this tape, on this sample, but if I'd prepared the surface and if I'd cleaned it down again, I'll give it a quick wipe just to be clean. Let's stick a strain gauge on with no pre-attached lead wires. So if I mark the area and I get my strain gauge out that I want to stick on, now it's a lot harder for me to hold. I haven't got the length of gauges that I need. So I've got a pair of flat blade tweezers that I can handle the gauge with. I can place the gauge down on the surface and use a second pair of tweezers to align it. Now I don't need to perfectly align it now because I'm going to do that a different way. The gauge is sticking down, In this case, I'm going to put solder tabs under here and attach some different lead wires underneath. So this is the correct orientation. I don't want to do it the other way and fold the lead wires back. So now I've got it roughly in the right place. I could pull my high release tape off. I stick the high release tape on top of the gauge, and that allows me to actually position the gauge right in the right spot on top of my marks. So now I've got my high release tape on my strain gauge. The idea is I use this high release tape as a hinge. So I've got to make sure I pull the high release tape up carefully not to damage the gauge. And I can fold that back like so. Sometimes I might need to hold it down just to hold it back. I could put my adhesive on the back of the gauge now. So I can put a stop drop of adhesive on the back there. And then I can fold this down with the adhesive on like that. And it's already pre-aligned because I'm using it like a hinge. So once I hold that down for about 5 seconds, you can see my gauge is perfectly aligned. Now you can do the same technique with the gauge with lead wires on, but sometimes those lead wires are quite heavy and they can pull a little bit on the tape. But really, it's a personal preference. If you like the tape, go for the tape. If you think you can do it freehand and hold it with the lead wires, then do it freehand. That's perfectly okay. So we'll take that one off. Now if we look at a long one like this PL gauge, this is commonly used for concrete. So you need a longer gauge for concrete. We'll do the same thing. Imagine we've got concrete here now. We've got a long strain gauge, and now these little lead wires, the gauge is quite floppy when we hold them out. So what we're going to do now is get the gauge out of the gauge binder with a pair of tweezers. You can see how sort of flexible this gauge is. This is where the tape probably comes into its best. We want to get it in the spot where we want to put the gauge on. You see just quite how long that is. And now we want to use another bit of high release tape again. A little bit longer this time because we want to go down the length of the gauge. We put our high release tape on. We can actually align the gauge to where we want it. And that's it there. And instead of going lengthways with our gauge now, we're going to go sideways. So we're going to peel this tape up from a sideways angle. So it's coming in from this side. Now we can get our adhesive out again, put the adhesive on the gauge and spread it around with the tip. And when we're ready to go, it's simply fold this over and then put even pressure on it for about 2 minutes. So that's just 2 other techniques, from sideways, from length on using the tape. It's really your personal preference, the way you'd like to go. Hopefully this video was good for you today. Thank you.